Are you considering opening a medical spa? If you are, stay tuned because today's expert, Allyson Avila, who is an attorney, is going to share with you 10 legal principles you need to know when opening and operating a medical spa and how to avoid costly mistakes. I'm Dori Soukup, founder of InSPAration Management. Welcome to today's Meet the Experts. If this is your first time with us, go ahead and subscribe to InSPAration Management YouTube channel, comment and share your thoughts with us. We publish innovative business strategies on a weekly basis to help you grow your business and reach success the fastest way possible. Welcome back. My guest today is Allyson Avila, partner at Gordon Rees in New York. She specializes in helping medical spa owners implement essential legal principles needed when opening and or operating a medical spa. Allyson is a friend and a colleague. She is truly an expert on this topic, and she's here today to help you gain clarity so you can protect your business and operate it within the legal guidelines and avoid these huge, costly mistakes. I am super excited that you're with us today, Allyson. Welcome, and thank you for taking the time to be with us.
Well, thank you, Dori, and thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be able to share some information and hopefully help any business owner or anybody that is looking to open up a new medical spa or practice. Make sure that they're compliant and stay compliant throughout the course of their business and avoid liability and any risk.
Yes. I have so many questions actually for you, but before we start, can you tell the audience a little more about you and your specialties and your firm?
So I've been practicing law for just about 20 years now. Started out doing a lot of defense litigation, medical malpractice litigation, defending doctors, and general liability. And then throughout the course of years, developed a healthcare practice because, especially in the medical spa arena, there was just a lacking of any knowledge or information on what compliance measures there were and who could do what and how to delegate certain tasks and what documents were necessary. So I developed this practice throughout the course of years, including employment, other healthcare issues, and regulatory issues. And I am the assistant managing partner of the Westchester office of Gordon Rees, which is a national firm. We have offices in all 50 states. So the benefit is that I have a practice throughout the entire country, and I also have partners in each individual state that can assist when necessary if there's any local issue that is happening. Mm-hmm. But our firm specializes in employment, healthcare, litigation, trademark, and branding, in a whole host of other areas.
Yes. Well, and that's why I wanted you to be here today, because you guys do so many things and address so many challenges that people have or help them avoid them. And as a consulting firm ourselves, we help so many entrepreneurs plan and get ready to launch a new business. But before we start helping them, we always ask about the first principle I want you to talk about here, and that's if they can even own a medical spa. And that's one mistake a lot of people make, a lot of entrepreneurs actually make. They think they can just open up a medical spa. So that's when we refer them to you and say, you've got to call Allyson and see how she can help you. So let's start there. Let's start with this first principle and tell everyone who can actually own a medical spa and who cannot, and what can they really do with that first step that they're thinking about actually going into business.
Right, Dori. I mean, I think that is obviously the first critical issue that has to be addressed by anyone who's looking to open up a spa. Unfortunately, it's very state specific, so there is no one generalized answer. You would have to look at the regulations for each state. And what I did was do research for all of the 50 states to determine who could actually open up a medical spa. So you really would have to consult with an attorney or myself, or even go through you, Dori, to get a referral to me. But for instance, in New York, a non-physician or non-NP cannot own a medical spa. In Florida, a non-physician can own a medical spa. So that's why I say it's very state specific. So you really need to speak to somebody who knows that and has done the research properly to get that answer.
Yeah. And that's why it's like the wild, wild west almost. Hopefully one day we would have a federal law for all this, so it's not so confusing, because it truly is. And that's why we refer people to an attorney like yourself, is because you want to make sure that you're doing the right thing. So that's the first principle. Before you start doing anything, you really need to check with an attorney and make sure that you can own a medical spa if that's the avenue you're going to take. Which makes us move to the second principle, Allison, which is when people come up with a name, and as a matter of fact, that's one thing we help people come up with, but then again, they think they can just come up with a name and use it. Well, we know that that's not true, because then they end up making mistakes and they're not protecting themselves or the name. So let's talk a little bit about trademark and how important that is, and how can they avoid these infringements or future problems that they could have if they did not select the proper name?
Well, that's an issue that really does come up very frequently, because a lot of times somebody already has filed through, say, LegalZoom to get a name. Sometimes they do it improperly in terms of having to have a professional. We'll get into this a little bit later on in the interview, but they'll file for a business entity rather than a professional entity, and they should have filed for a professional entity. But there are two steps to it. So one is, just because the state may have the name available and you might be able to get that name through the state, that does not mean that somebody does not already have a trademark on that name. So what you have to do is a twofold search. We do the trademark searching rather in depth, because there could be trademarks that are, some people try to do it themselves. So there could be some trademark names listed, but maybe not active any longer. Or there could be a name that is already trademarked, where you might be able to, if you've already chosen that name and started using it, that you might be able to negotiate with that person and get them to allow you to use that name with some sort of variation. So there are some ways that you can work around a trademark issue. If, however, you've already gone through your name, you got your name, and then you didn't do a trademark search and you start using somebody's name that is already been trademarked, you could potentially face a trademark infringement claim, and those are very expensive to defend and very difficult to defend, because if somebody already has it, there's really no excuse for you not to have done that search first. Trademark searches are really not very expensive. And it has to really go in conjunction with the name that you're looking for. So it really isn't just as simple as just going to LegalZoom and picking out a name and then putting it out there and getting, even if you got your domain name, because a lot of people like a name, they pick out their domain name, and that might be available, but that does not alleviate any infringement claims of trademarks. So, I think the essential part of this is really do your homework. If you're looking to build a successful business and you really want to avoid any potential problems, do all your homework up front. It doesn't really cost much, but you'll have a lot less headache in the long run.
I think that's such important advice, because a lot of people think they can just pick a name out of a hat and that's it. And then we hear the horror stories later on. So this is great advice that Allison just gave you. So definitely I would reach out to an attorney like herself and then make sure that you're doing the proper homework before you actually go and start your business. Now the third principle, go ahead.
I don't want to interrupt you, but I mean, I could say specifically, we just had this issue just a few weeks ago where somebody, got their name, they incorporated, they got their website, they've been doing business for quite a while with this particular name, and they have what they call trolls, trademark trolls, and they will search websites. And it just so happened that, this name was really great for the guy. It just, he loved it. He was doing some good business, but he was infringing on somebody's trademark. So we had to work with the other company to try to come up with a solution where he would be able to keep some portion of that name, but that it wouldn't be confused with the name of the entity that already had the trademark. So it is real and it happens. And even if you think you have just a small business, they'll come after you.
Yes. And that's why I really wanted us to discuss all these principles, because they are so important to anybody either opening or actually already in business, which leads me to the third question, actually, the third principle we want to talk about, and that's how to incorporate and how to choose the type of corporations they want to have. So there are different options that they can have. Do you have some insight on, I know they need an accountant to help set up the certain documentation for their business, but also an attorney is very important in that, deciding on what kind of company they really want. So what are some of your thoughts on that?
Well, again, it's state specific, because some states are going to require that you open up as a professional corporation and you will not have a choice in that. Some states will require that you have a professional entity, so that could either be a professional corporation or a professional limited liability company. I personally like limited liability companies better if you have the ability to do that in a state. Like in California, you cannot have a professional limited liability company, but you can have a professional corporation. But limited liability companies, they offer the same protection as a corporation, except it doesn't come with all of the statutory requirements. So with a corporation, you have to have annual meetings, you have to have minutes of those meetings, you have to have a shareholders agreement, you have to have bylaws. So there's a lot more formality to that corporate structure. You also want to make sure always, whether it's let me just backtrack a little bit, with the limited liability company, it's you get the same protections. It's just that you really can operate with an operating agreement. Some states require that you publish the filing of the LLC in a newspaper, like in New York and some other states. But then once you do that, you essentially have your operating agreement, and there's nothing more that you have to do. You don't have to have any meeting minutes. You don't have to have all of that corporate structure. So personally, I like that better. I think it's a little bit less costly.
Right.
But in either event, what you do have to do is to make sure that if you are going to form a corporation or a limited liability company, that you really do follow the structure. So you don't want to intermingle your own personal funds within the company or the corporation, because there's something that's called piercing the corporate veil. So the reason why you're developing a company or a corporation is because you're trying to take away your personal exposure, your personal liability. And that's why you have the corporation. When you start intermingling and not following the corporate structures, then somebody can pierce the corporate veil to say the person itself is liable, because they're really having this corporation sort of just like as a I can't think of the word, but sort of like a farce. That it's really not a corporation; it's really the person's own individual account. If that makes any sense, it gets a little bit complicated, but the bottom line is you really need to keep you as a person separate and apart from either your company or your corporation in terms of your banking and your formalities.
Right. Yeah, you definitely need a clean financial structure, so you're not commingling things and causing problems at the end of the year for your taxes and all that. So the cleaner you are, the better off you are, basically.
Yeah, and the reason also for that is because a lot of times if the company is not doing well, they think then, okay, well, I will just file for bankruptcy, for instance, and to avoid certain liabilities. And that's where sometimes piercing the corporate veil would come into play, because they would say, well, it's really not the company that we're after. It's you, because you really didn't follow what the corporate structure was.
I see.
And you're intermingling your own funds.
Yes, not a good idea to do. Yes. Let's talk a little bit about different licenses maybe that they need, or liabilities, or things that, like, is there a list of things or a couple of little principles that they need to be aware of so they can protect themselves, protect their clients, their trade, things like that?
Well, licenses in terms, obviously, anybody that's practicing has to have a valid and up-to-date professional license. So whether it's going to be the doctor, nurse practitioner, cosmetologist, whoever it is, has to have a valid license. Dependent on the state and the locality, you may have to have a separate business license. I know that there are certain localities that require that you register, not specifically as a medical spa, but as either as a medical office or even just a business in general, so that you can pay the business tax to that particular locality. But other than those licenses, you don't need to have, a special OSHA license or, a license to operate a, piece of laser equipment or anything like that. It's typically just your, your permits and COs for your location or your facility, and your professional licenses.
Yeah, good. All right, let's move on to principle number 5, and that's, I know, an important one, and a lot of people actually make the mistake. There are certain documents that the business owner needs to keep on location, as far as, like you mentioned, OSHA or HIPAA laws or all kinds of things, protocols, procedures. As a matter of fact, I know that you helped us create a very great product, by the way, that we are very thankful for, and we called it Protect Your Medical Spa. So can we talk a little bit about what things they should have in their medical spa or medical facilities to protect themselves?
Well, first and foremost, you definitely need to have everybody's licensed on site. Most often, the licenses have to actually be posted on the wall when you're walking in or somewhere within the facility that the patient or consumer can see. You have to have the protocols in place and on site, because if an investigator ever came in to take a look at how you're practicing, it's not good enough that you just verbally tell them, well, we have a protocol in place for blood-borne pathogens, or we have a protocol in place for medication recalls. They want to see that in writing, and that is really very important. I have had several instances where either a patient or a competitor has complained against another spa, saying that they were doing things improperly, that they weren't properly storing the medications. And so when an investigator came in and they didn't have those documents on site, then they were actually cited. So you have to, and your staff has to have all of that information as well. Most states also require that if you are not on site, that you have protocols in place for your standard operating procedures in terms of, well, how do you do Botox? How do you do filler? How much is enough? What happens if, there's an adverse incident? Do you have a crash filler kit? Universal precautions, medication recalls, how to store medication, how to transport medication. All of those documents are included in the product, I know, Dori, that we developed together. And that you sell, and that it's imperative, and it's mostly for staff concern, and it's also for your state investigators, who will definitely take a look at your location and make sure that you have it.
Yeah, I think the important thing, and what I've learned from you over the years, is that you should always have your T's crossed and your I's dotted. You should always have all your ducks in a row and have all the documentations that you need, because if somebody does show up at your doorstep, the last thing you want to do is get those penalties, and they end up being very costly. And I'm sure I know you've told me a lot of different horror stories with that, and you really want to avoid that at all costs.
I mean, I think also one thing people don't realize is that there are a lot of laser safety regulations, and even OSHA requires that you have a laser safety officer and that you have a laser protocol in place on site, and that you post signs on the door when a laser is in use. So it's not so much that you just go to a vendor, you get a piece of equipment and you start using this laser. I mean, there are federal and state requirements, especially when you're using that type of medical equipment. Other documents that you need to have, obviously, are, consent forms. And those consent forms really have to be accurate and up to date, and also all inclusive. So if there is a risk of a procedure that might be, minimal, but it's something that is a known risk. It must be included in those consent forms. And I know that we developed them, and I believe that they can get them through you, Dori, right?
Yes, the protect your medical spa.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so, yeah, I mean, and that was something that I did because, developed with a legal frame of mind, because I have defended cases where somebody says that they had a lack of informed consent, and that's a part of a malpractice case. So, there's two causes of action, right? One is just the malpractice, they deviated from the standard of care, and then the other is the lack of informed consent. So in preparing those informed consents, it was with the mindset of, okay, if somebody's going to sue, what needs to be really included in this? And a lot of times the manufacturers, people think they can go on a website and just grab something that, either somebody else did or they get it from the manufacturer. But they are usually not all inclusive, and they're very scant. So I do not suggest that people get the consent forms that are there. Also, any of your social media consent forms, your photographs, the financial intake, the history, everything has to be documented. And I like I said, you can talk about this, I guess, later on, but that it's all been developed in the manual that we created, so that it's sort of just a turnkey operation. You purchase that, and you really are set in terms of the type of documentation that you would need to protect yourself.
Yeah. And, you said a point that was very important. A lot of times they just take the consent form from their vendors and they think that they're all set. So please be aware. It's very important to have the proper consent forms, so you are protecting yourself, your team, and your business. And that way you're not just leaving things out in the open and having that liability that could happen, because people get burned. I'm sure you've defended all kinds of cases where they get a reaction, they get burned, they have problems, and then what do? Then you're out in the cold, and that's something you definitely want to avoid, for sure. Great. Let's move on to principle number 6, which is having to do with the team. Like, we teach the Clarity hiring system to help clients recruit and hire people. But then we talk to a lot of people where they don't have all the legal documentations necessary, or they don't have clarity on which person on the team can do what treatment. And that's a big problem. And I know you've had many cases where they've had certain team members doing treatments that they had no business doing. Like, for example, sometimes in Texas, the wild, wild west, you have estheticians injecting Botox, which that's like a no-no. So how do we make sure that the owner is informed properly and knows exactly who they need to hire and what can that person really do? So should that all go into like an agreement, employment agreement, guidelines? What's your advice?
So the first step is, obviously, because it's state specific, you would really need to consult with somebody that knows what the state requirements are, as who can do what. So, we, like I said, we have done that. Once you are knowledgeable about who can perform a certain procedure that you want them to perform, then it's a little bit easier, so that you know what staff you should ultimately hire. Because the last thing you want to do is hire somebody and then realize that they're not able to do what you initially expected them to be able to do. And then, one step that a lot of people miss is really getting an application form signed and submitted by the applicant. And that's really important, because you want to be able to, check references. You also want to make sure that the information that they're putting on there is accurate, because if somebody goes in and puts on their application that they worked for, I just actually had this, that they worked for a particular person for, 6 months, but they really only worked for that person for, 2 days. Well, then immediately you want to terminate that relationship right away, because they lied. But people, and there are many states that actually require that you have an application in their personnel file, not just a resume, but an actual application. And then you obviously, you have UW forms and, your federal documents. But you don't always have to have an employment agreement. Even though you can have an employment agreement that says it is at will, most states are at will, I do recommend that people do have some employment agreements so that at least directs what their expectations are, and that that it is at will. You don't always have to put in their hourly rate, but I do suggest that you do, so that people don't say, hey, you know what, you told me it was going to be X amount, and now you're telling me it's Y. Mm-hmm. And then within the employment agreements, there should always be either a non-compete or a non-solicitation. Some mm-hmm. states won't allow you to have a non-compete. And in those states that don't, then you should still have the non-solicitation. I don't know any state that does not allow a non-solicitation. And that just means that, while somebody is working and for a period of time, after they work, they cannot take away any of your employees or, directly or indirectly any of your vendors, consumers, customers or anything, because sometimes that happens where you might work with somebody for a bit of time, and then like the way that person is injecting. And so you may not be competing directly, but you want to try to take that other person mm-hmm. away from the employer. Mm-hmm. And within those agreements as well is we put in work for hire clauses. And that is to protect the photographs and other social media that person or the employee might create while they are on site and as an employee. Because most of the time, the employee tries to take those photographs as their own afterwards mm-hmm. and post them on social media so that they will gain more patience from that. And even though they may have been the ones who performed the work, it would belong to the company. Mm-hmm. And so the company would retain access to that. And if somebody does not return the photographs or uses them, then you have a cause of action against them for breaching the agreement. So those are, important clauses to put in an employment agreement. And that does not mean that because it's an employment agreement that it has to be for a time period, you have to employ them for a year or more or anything else. It just means that you want to have a contract with them so that these clauses are known mm-hmm. before they start working.
Actually, that's a big problem with a lot of people that we work with, where they would hire, let's say, an NP or a PA. They build this huge following on Instagram. They're like superstars. And mm-hmm. they're paying them a lot of money, right? And then they help position themselves as the experts, and then they leave, and here the owner is left with nothing. And this is a lot of business. So each person can be generating $1 million in revenue. So to have that person up and go is a huge loss to a lot of businesses. How can they protect themselves from something like that, Allyson?
I mean, really, it would be through a non-compete. And, for those states that won't allow a non-compete, there are clauses that you could put in saying that if they leave within a certain time period, if there's any training that you have provided to them, that they would have to pay the cost for that training. Mm-hmm. But in states where there is no non-compete, I mean, it's, unfortunate, but it's
nothing they can do. Yeah, that's terrible.
I mean, there's not really many states. California is one of them that you can't have a non-compete. Mm-hmm. Massachusetts, they're changing it around a little bit. That it was at a time where you couldn't. I think they're trying to relax those a little bit. New York, New Jersey, most other states you can. Mm-hmm. But the difficult thing too also is because it's medical treatment. It's a patient really has the right to go to any provider that they choose. Mm-hmm. So if you're not necessarily soliciting those patients, but they want to come and find you, it would be very difficult for you to have a cause of action against them mm-hmm. because the patient has the right to go wherever they want to.
Yeah, good advice. What about insurances? I know I had Ed Kuhn on. I know you know him as well. He does a lot of liability insurance work. And he was actually on Meet the Expert not too long ago, so you might want to go and watch it if you are with us today. But are there certain things that they need to be doing with insurance besides liability?
Yeah, you need to have an employee professional liability policy. And that's the one that's going to protect any claims against harassment or sexual discrimination. It's an EPLI policy. Those are really very important because a lot of companies do not have them, and that means that then you are sort of out of luck. You would have to pay out of pocket for that. So it's something it's overlooked very frequently. So you really need to have that. The other one is cyber policies. So because everything is so social media oriented, and with the network, and even EMR, everything is really going through websites and online. You should have some cyber security policies that would protect you in case there's any sort of breach. Those are the two that aside from like the malpractice, obviously, and the general liability, are very much overlooked and very much needed.
Yes. Great advice, and it's so important to have all that really in an employee handbook or in different agreements like we talked about, whether it's an employment agreement or a training agreement or whatever you want to have for your team with your position offer. I just think we practice like total clarity. We give advice. The more clear you are on how to structure your business and how to bring on team members and how to make sure everything's clear on what they can do, cannot do, protocols, procedures, consent forms, all the things that we covered today. Those are all essential principles for you to really succeed with your business. And you can't cut corners on those, can they, Allison? Like, that's so important.
Yeah. I mean, it's there'd be really no reason to start a business if you're not really going to invest the time in order to protect that business, because you're sort of then just throwing money out the window. And we know it's such a litigious time period. And we know also that, patients will try to get their money back for every which way that they possibly can, just because they want to get something for free.
Yeah.
And so if you're not protecting yourself, then you really are, you're at risk. And many of these things are just not, they're not expensive. They're not complicated to get. So there's really no excuse. I mean, I know I try to protect my license at all costs, right? Because that's my living.
Yeah.
So I don't know why anyone in business would not want to do that for themselves.
Yeah. Actually, that is my principle number 10 is it's a lot cheaper, I think, to do everything right in the beginning rather than do it half and then end up costing you a lot of money. I call it not reinventing the wheel. And, we all have our expertise, right? Like we help people open up the business. You help people structure their business with all their legalities that they need. Our clients are great at what they do in providing medical spa treatments. So I think if we all focus on what we do best and do it, then everybody is better off. But the problem is a lot of people like to cut corners and think that, she's so expensive, or I don't want to pay for this and I don't want to pay for that. And then they end up paying more in the long run. You see that all the time, don't you?
Oh, I see it all of the time. And then ultimately people are paying double because they, for instance, set up a business. I've seen very frequently is they'll go to, say, an attorney that just does regular business and doesn't have any knowledge about medical spas or medical practices. And they will go and they will set up a regular business entity for, say, a physician. Yeah. When you can't do it that way, you have to have it as a professional entity. And so you've not only now paid that lawyer the cost of his, his time and fees, and also paid the state the fees for the business entity, but you can't use it. So now you have to go and reinvent the wheel and start from scratch. Yeah. So you have to go to people who know what they're talking about. And I think that's, imperative. I mean, it's imperative in terms of, in marketing and training. It's an imperative in all facets. It's like going to, when you go to a doctor, you want to go to a doctor that knows what he's doing, not just somebody that is sort of like, a fly by night and will do just about any procedure without the training.
Well, or a specialized doctor, right? So if you have headaches, you don't go to a foot doctor, you go to a brain doctor.
Right.
So, and it's the same thing with Allison. So their specialties are to help medical spa owners set up and structure their business properly from the very beginning, where a regular attorney cannot really do that, or nor do they even know what the guidelines are. So you're really setting yourself up for failure rather than success. So you just have to be very careful. You know, a lot of people, Allison, when we first start working with someone, they don't even know that, you know, attorneys like you exist. And when we tell them that, it's like light bulbs are, you know, opening up, going on, and realizing that, oh, I need a medical spa attorney. I'm like, yeah, you need to know the specific laws, and especially in your state, like you mentioned. So it's a very interesting dilemma right now with all the different laws and regulations that the medical spa industry has to deal with. But thank God for people like you, right?
Well, and I thank God for people like you that are helping people, you know, get started and you know, training and getting them the, you know, the documents that they need. So, you know, it's great to work with you, and you know, it's great. You know, I have some people that come to me where they've had so many issues with other companies, and you know, I can't really stress enough how important it is to go to someone like you, because you know, you do cross all your T's and dot all your I's, and you know, you make sure whatever it is that you're telling somebody is the accurate information, right? So and that's just, you know, equally as important as anything that I do.
Yes, thank you so much. And we love having you as a resource for us, because it takes a lot of pressure off of us knowing that they're going to someone that's going to take great care of them. I am going to put your information below the video, so anybody that's thinking about opening up a medical spa, or if you are already open but you're not sure if you're doing things the proper way, please feel free to reach out to Allison. Again, she is in New York, but if you are in another state, she'll be more than happy to refer you to one of her colleagues that's going to be in a different state. So that, like she said, they cover the entire United States. It's a huge firm, and they can definitely help you.
And I would just add that even if you are in another state, I ordinarily handle all of the work throughout the country. And but if I needed something very local, then I would consult with a partner. So it's not like you would have to be dealing with, you know, a variety of different people that you know, have not met through either this program. So you would never really have to worry about
good. Good to know. Well, that's wonderful. Well, I am so excited that you were able to join us, Allison. Thank you so much for sharing those essential principles with our audience. I think it's so important for all of you to really practice them and make sure that you have structured your business properly, so you don't have any business disruptions or have any costly mistakes that are going to come your way. So thank you so much for your time today, Allison.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Okay.
Do you want to be on the next Meet the Experts? If you are in the medical spa industry and you are an expert in your field, please go to meettheexperts.com and apply to be on the show. The show's goal is to help entrepreneurs and medical professionals discover the latest and the greatest treatments, products, and strategies to succeed. Thank you again so much for watching. Go ahead and leave us comments, share this video, and subscribe to this great channel. Be well and stay inspired until we meet again. Thank you so much for watching.